Avoid axioms. Ha! Now you have a conundrum. Because we're going to talk about the most common writing axioms going. Next to that one about needless words, that is. The first two usually go something like, don't use the passive voice, and don't use adverbs. Is that good advice, though? When it is, it's really good advice. But when it's not, it's not. The trick with all these writing conventions is to understand the logic undergirding the axioms and to write with that logic in mind. So what's this deal with the passive voice? The conventional wisdom is that it lacks force. Stephen King says so, and he's far from alone in this assessment. If English teachers got an extra dime for every time they said don't use the passive voice or scratched out a passive verb on a paper, they might not complain about being underpaid ever again. Mr. King chalks up the overuse of passive verbs to timidity, and he recommends that the writer get over the insecurity. He writes, I think unsure writers also feel the passive voice somehow lends their work authority, or perhaps even a quality of majesty. If you find instruction manuals and lawyers' torts majestic, I guess it does. One of the examples King gives of an acceptable case of a passive verb, unsurprisingly, concerns a dead body. The body was carried from the kitchen and placed on the parlor sofa, is a fair way to put this, although was carried and was placed still irk the shit out of me. I accept them, but I don't embrace them. What I would embrace is Freddie and Myra carried the body out of the kitchen and laid it on the parlor sofa. Why does the body have to be the subject of the sentence anyway? It's dead, for Christ's sake. Except, respectfully, Mr. King, that sometimes the body needs to be the subject of the sentence, such as when a group of investigators are talking about the body. The body was moved 3 days ago is a perfectly reasonable sentence, especially when the investigators have no idea who might have moved the body yet. King's point about active verbs carrying more force is well taken, and their habitual use generally conveys more forceful writing. But to take this generalization as an edict neglects the occasion where a passive verb is the better choice. After all, if the passive voice didn't have a useful function other than to annoy successful writers and middling English teachers, it would have long since faded out of use. The eminent cognitive scientist Steven Pinker makes a good case for the utility of the passive voice, highlighting its main function, to allow the writer to direct the reader's focus onto the subject of the sentence. He writes, actives and passives differ in which character gets to be the subject, and hence, which starts out in the reader's mental spotlight. An active construction trains the reader's gaze on someone who is doing something. See that lady with the shopping bag? She's pelting a mime with zucchini. The passive trains the reader's gaze on someone who's having something done to him. See that mime? He's being pelted with zucchini by the lady with the shopping bag. And the reality is that sometimes things are going to happen to your characters. Here's an example. Randall's leg had been fractured in the accident, causing him tremendous pain over the past few weeks. It might be a struggle to find a better way of stating this with an active construction. Maybe something like, in the accident, a collision with the dashboard had fractured Randall's femur, causing him tremendous pain over the past few weeks. Is that better? Not really. It also shifts the focus away from poor Randall, who sits there broken-legged and now seems less important than the collision that broke his leg in the first place. So what can we take away from this heated Stephen-on-Stephen grammatical showdown? They actually both agree with each other mostly. Consistent use of the passive voice will weaken the force of your writing, which is why people repeat the axiom, but never let an axiom get in the way of good common sense. When it's used to a purpose, the passive voice can be your friend. Understanding the purpose is the point here. This is almost the same question that we wrestled with when talking about viewpoint. Maintain command over the place you wish to put your reader's focus, and passives likely won't be a problem in your writing. Stephen King, I suspect, would agree. Begrudgingly. Begrudgingly? Begrudgingly? Oh, come on, Ro, now you're just trying to get under my skin, fictional Stephen King would surely say. Because Stephen doesn't like adverbs much either. You're right, Stephen, that was a low blow, designed specifically to wind you up, as are the two adverbs in this sentence. Haha. Because if you're hard on passives, you're absolutely savage on adverbs. Seriously though, Stephen, I think you're mostly right again here too. And Stephen's not the only writer out there to wage war on the poor, weak, defenseless adverb. What did the adverb ever do to anyone anyway? Well, often the adverb gets thrown around as a way for a lazy writer to cover up a vague choice in verbs, as in, Gino went back to the car quickly, getting the gun from under the driver's seat. Well, I'm with you here, Stephen. That adverb, quickly, is damn lazy in this case. It's covering up for a poor choice in verbs, went. There are like a million verbs that describe the way people can get from point A to point B. Did Gino run, sprint, dash, dart, rush? Or maybe he just hurried. Point is, as a writer, you've got options here. Often, an adverb is more of a symptom of an underlying problem, a writer's lack of specificity with their word choice. Being in the ballpark isn't good enough if you want to be a good writer. You need to decide how your reader is going to envision Gino getting from point A to point B, and went is too vague. The writer knows it too, otherwise he wouldn't have qualified went with that obnoxious adverb quickly. It's a crutch that a lazy writer is using to cover up for his unwillingness to command the situation with the type of precision excellent prose demands. In this case, Stephen's dead on. Pick a better verb. Went quickly is just the writer asking the reader to do his job for him. Sometimes, though, adverbs are the right tool for the job. Take the following sentence. Tread carefully whenever you deal with the syndicate, Spike, said Jet. Our friend Jet has a point here. You don't want to mess with the syndicate. And you don't have many better options than tread carefully. Is there a verb that conveys that sentiment better? Tiptoe, sneak, pussyfoot, prevaricate. These might be synonyms in the thesaurus sense, but they don't convey the necessary connotations that go along with treading carefully in the way Jet means it. Is there a better way to say that? And is that going to sound natural in Jet's dialogue? Again, the axiom, don't use adverbs, fails us here. There are a couple other cases where it falls short as well. The first is that sometimes a creatively chosen adverb can add a descriptive image-bearing color to a sentence that a verb alone cannot. Two great ones come to mind from Moby Dick. With slouched hat, Ahab lurchingly paced the planks, mingling their mumblings with his own mastications. Thousands on thousands of sharks, swarming round the dead Leviathan, smackingly feasted on its fatness. Lurchingly and smackingly, in these two cases, are adverbs that are perfect cues to help the reader visualize the action being conveyed. Ahab has a peg leg. Doesn't that pair of adverb and verb, lurchingly paced, exactly call to mind the image of a peg-legged old man walking up and down his deck? And in the second sentence, Ishmael is describing a feeding frenzy of sharks. If you've ever seen Shark Week, you know Melville just nails this description of how a swarm of sharks snaps at their food, smackingly feasting, calls this image to mind, dare I say it, perfectly? Can't you just picture their toothy jaws snapping shut on the carcass? Or check out this gem. The agonized whale goes into his flurry. The tow line is slackened, and the pitchpoler, dropping astern, folds his hands and mutely watches the monster die. The adverb mutely is doubly perfect here. Removing it would both disrupt the obvious rhythm of the third tricolon element in this musical sentence, and it would weaken the descriptive force of the image. The pitchpoler's folded hands and his silence giving the reader a real sense of regret or remorse that comes with the slaughter. Subtracting this adverb would be a crime. Rhythm, as we could see in the previous example, is another place where adverbs can be your best friend. They can be an excellent tool for controlling and maintaining a pleasing rhythm in a sentence. Generally, they're polysyllabic, so if you have the right adverb with the right sound to it, they're the perfect word when you need a few syllables to make a sentence sound just right. We've seen this before. It is a quiet noon scene among the isles of the Pacific, a French whaler anchored inshore in a calm and lazily taking water on board. Note how the extra 3 syllables in the adverb lazily help to balance the rhythm here. The syllable count after the word whaler goes as follows: 2-2-3 and 3-2-2-1-1. Removing the adverb wouldn't destroy this sentence, but there's no denying the rhythm of the sentence is better with it in there. and it's accurately descriptive, fitting the quiet noon scene. And lest you think Melville is the only writer who works like this, you should check out F. Scott doing his thing. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their hips, the two young women preceded us out onto a rosy-colored porch open toward the sunset, where 4 candles flickered on the table in the diminished wind. I am self-confessedly lukewarm on Fitzgerald and on this book in particular, but I'd have to be either rhythmically challenged or fragrantly dishonest not to recognize the beauty of such a sentence. The magnificent image this sentence conjures of the two women sauntering onto the porch is echoed by the structure, a tricolon crescendo of loose modifiers to start this mid-branching sentence, and the rhythm is beautiful. Slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their hips. It's almost as if these adverbs are here to delay the reader's arrival at the base clause. It's a slow walk outside with them. Fitz is escorting you there with this rhythm. You just can't do this without these adverbs. It sounds beautiful enough to make me ignore the reality that the meaning of that first adverb doesn't mesh very well with the verb. A sentence like, "They slenderly preceded us," wouldn't make much sense. But Fitz somehow cheats those slender girls into that slow walk this way. It's undeniably top class. You may also remember from our lesson on dialogue tags that Stephen didn't much care for adverbs in them either, which puts it mildly. Old F. Scott, though, defies the modern-day convention here, too. "Well, these books are all scientific," insisted Tom, glancing at her impatiently. "We've got to beat them down," whispered Daisy, winking ferociously toward the fervent sun. "You ought to live in California," began Miss Baker, but Tom interrupted her by shifting heavily in his chair. "I'll tell you a family secret," she whispered enthusiastically. "It's about the butler's nose. Do you want to hear about the butler's nose?" All 4 of those examples of adverbs and dialogue tags appear in the span of a page, and none of them are particularly offensive. They help the reader to grasp the subtext in this uncomfortable conversation Tom is foisting onto everyone else. Even without the rest of the context, you can see he doesn't take it well when his odious opinions are met with sarcasm and derision. He shifts heavily in his chair, and when Daisy gets the opportunity to change the subject, she jumps at it, whispering the family secret enthusiastically, to make it perfectly clear to Tom, subtextually, that they'd much rather talk about something else. Adverbs are a tool, like any other tool the writer has at her disposal. To advocate for a writer not to use them is, I would say, almost poetically hypocritical. It's lazy teaching in the same way throwing adverbs around willy-nilly is lazy writing. Writers and teachers like Stephen King, who get annoyed by adverbs, actually aren't annoyed by the adverbs themselves. They're annoyed by the imprecision or diffidence that makes the adverbs necessary. As we've seen, they can help to produce beautifully rhythmical, image-laden prose that adds clarity to an otherwise ambiguous scene. To advocate for a writer to not use them is a bit like a shop teacher telling the kids not to touch the bandsaw. It's dangerous! Well, yeah, but it's also a damn good tool when you need to make certain cuts. To avoid it outright would be an act of the same timidity King rails against. You just don't want to be making every cut with the bandsaw. So too with the adverb. You're probably already noticing a pattern here. To everything a season. So I'm going to ask you to keep that old axiom in mind when I promulgate a couple of my own. These have to do with the writer's treatment of the base clause. The first is that it's generally a good idea to keep your subject close to your verb. This speaks to reader sensitivity. It makes life easy on your reader, because as we've seen in this section, a huge part of what a reader is doing when they parse a sentence is figuring out the relationship between the subject and its verb. Essentially, a reader is trying to figure out what did what. When you give the reader the what and delay the did what, you're asking the reader to hold the subject in their cognitive container as they process the intervening information. Sometimes a brief interruption is okay, even useful. Consider this sentence as an example. Donna, for all her bluster, always comes to a sensible conclusion. In this case, it's a very brief interruption, and the interruption conveys critical information that colors the reader's interpretation of the predicate. It's as though Donna likes to kick up a fuss so much that one would think she's a downright unreasonable person. But the truth is that, in the end, Donna is reliable. If we'd followed the axiom in question, keep your subject close to your verb, the sentence might sound like this instead. For all her bluster, Donna always comes to a sensible conclusion. To my mind, this sentence is weaker. Notice how the first version emphasizes Donna by placing her first in the sentence. The first version also minimizes for all her bluster syntactically, which is appropriate considering the predicate is going to contradict it. This is a good place to bend our axiom, keep the subject close to the verb, to a specific purpose. Let's see how failing to do so might create problems for your reader. Jacob, entirely convinced of the justness of his cause, which prompted him to fits of rage when his ideology was contradicted, frequently driving him to rail against the government, a pit of vipers, the media, the willing tools of the elite, and the other political activists, a pack of braying fools, all of whose ideals were assumed to be entirely hypocritical and appalling, would dress in the manner of a 16th century town crier each Tuesday and shout the state's corruption from the steps of City Hall. Did you get all that? The base clause of that monstrosity is, Jacob would dress and shout. The major problem with this sentence is that it asks the reader to hold Jacob in the old cognitive container for a very long time before it offers the reader the main verb to which it connects. And in the meantime, there are a couple subordinate clauses, a long loose modifier with a list of complex items, a passive construction. Oh man, why don't you just ask the reader to help you move on Saturday, dude? Parsing this sucker is a lot of work. It's perfectly grammatical writing. And it's just the type of perfectly grammatical writing that will turn your book into a doorstop. The moral of this story is to break apart subject and verb with caution and purpose. The second subject-related axiom is quite similar. This usually isn't a huge problem in fiction, but it's a major flaw in tons and tons of academic writing, from English 101 essays to papers by tenured professors in academic journals. The dreaded endless subject. Check it out. The idea that Cynthia could allow Thomas to come back into their lives after all the trouble he'd caused their entire family over the years was something that Constance, for all the support she'd lent her sister, frankly couldn't fathom. Blah, what a clunker! That entire 25-word noun phrase to begin the sentence is the subject. And compared to similarly offensive academic writing, this isn't even that egregious an affront to the writing gods. Jumble in a healthy dose of pretentiousness and the usual garbled jargon, and you've got yourself a published paper, Dr. Rowe. But seriously, this is such a simple fix. After all the trouble he'd caused them, Constance couldn't fathom that Cynthia would allow Thomas back into their lives. Again, most fiction writers know better than this, but, in the immortal words of Biggie, if you don't know, now you know. Keep those subjects snappy and clear, and your reader's cognitive container will be primed for actual useful information, like vivid images and lyrical, rhythmic prose. So those are the loose ends in these lessons on the sentence. I've got one more lesson to wrap up this session on the text. We'll do a bit of summing up, explore how you might put all this stuff to work for you, and attempt a modest philosophy of prose, which you can take with the amount of salt appropriate to such a vain idea. See you then.